Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the City of Brentwood's Board of Aldermen meeting. This one is for September 17th, 2018. Our first item on the agenda is to check up on attendance for tonight's meeting. We do have one of our aldermen who is going to be absent this meeting. Alderman Wegge, his son is having a birthday celebration. The family's having a well-deserved gathering for that. Other than that, we're all set here except for myself. Yours truly sitting in the place of mayor just for this evening. And if we could please move forward with roll call.
Alderman Dimmitt.
Yes. Here.
Alderman Kramer.
Yes, present.
Alderman Leahy.
Here.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Here.
Alderwoman O'Neill. Here. Alderman Plufka.
Here.
And Alderwoman Sims.
Here.
Thanks so much. We have a quorum for this evening. If we could now please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have before you the agenda for tonight's meeting. And for those of you in attendance, members, our residents, members of the Brentwood area, we have some printed agendas and information there on the tables outside the meeting quarters here. Now would be a good time to grab that information if you'd like to follow along. Taking a look at tonight's agenda, do we have any recommendations, proposals, or requests to make a change to that agenda or a motion to approve as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
We have a first and a second to approve the agenda as submitted. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. We're going to move forward now with the announcements, appointments, and proclamations, the recognitions. And we have a special one here this evening. I have some words to pass along to you that will have a lot of meaning to those who are familiar with the story and those who may not be familiar. Alderman Leahy, if you would, could you give us some background on the LaMartina family?
Yes, sir. Lily LaMartina is just 5 years of age. She was diagnosed with leukemia 28 months ago when she was just over the age of 2.5. She has undergone a number of treatments and some hospitalizations, but in the last 9 months now, she is in remission, which is a wonderful state to be in for her cancer. Her sisters are very much involved with Youth in Action. It's a Kirkwood group, and they have requested from the Make-A-Wish Foundation to grant Lily's request and wish to go to Disney World in Florida. So they are working towards raising the funds to make that possible to work with. And four of the LaMartina kids go to St. Mary Magdalene's. And St. Mary Magdalene School is having a special day on October the 6th to help raise funds to help cover the cost of granting the wish. And in recognition of that, they asked if the city would kindly do a proclamation in Lily's honor for that day. And that's what's before us this evening. Would you like me to read the proclamation, or would you like to do that, sir?
Alderman Leahy, please, go right ahead.
Thank you, sir. From the city of Brentwood, state of Missouri, proclamation in recognition of Lily Day. Whereas Lily LaMartina attends St. Mary Magdalene Catholic School in the city of Brentwood. And whereas Lily is 5 years old and has been battling leukemia for the past 27 months and is currently in remission. And whereas the Youth in Action, Kirkwood, is teaming up with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and the city of Brentwood and Rock Hill would like to send Lily and her family to Walt Disney World. And whereas Youth in Action Kirkwood, with the help of President Emmy LaMartina, Vice President Anna LaMartina, and members at large, Mina LaMartina, have committed to helping them pursue this goal by holding a fun fair on October the 6th, 2018, to help funds for this trip. Now therefore, I, Thomas Kramer, presiding officer of the city of Brentwood, Missouri, do hereby proclaim October the 6th as Lily Day, in witness hereof, and have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the city of Brentwood to be affixed this 17th day of September 2018. For those, Your Honor, that would like to help get involved in this program or would like to make a donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, checks can be made payable to the Youth in Action in Kirkwood or specifically to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. All you have to do is down in the bottom of the check in the comment section, put down Lily LaMartina's name so that the funds will go towards granting that wish. And they will take funds, I think the program goes until March or April of next year to be able to raise. The total cost of granting this wish is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. They have had a car wash so far. They've done a Green Tree game booth. They're going to do the program at Mary Magdalene. There are a couple other things that are in the work. We have also done 4 blood drives in Lily LaMartina's name and my son's name. We have another one coming up in January of 2019, and that will be at the Brentwood Rec Center. Thank you, Your Honor.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you, Alderman. Blessings and well wishes to courageous Lily and her family. We hope that the trip to Walt Disney World is awarded soon and everybody gets to have a good time. Thank you so much. We're going to move on with our agenda, and we're up to the opportunity for a public hearing. Let's gavel that in. 7:09. This is the public hearing for the 2018 property tax rates. And City Administrator Akande, do you have anything for us?
Thank you, Alderman Kramer. The city is required by state statute to annually hold a public hearing before the adoption of the proposed property tax rate. And prior to today, we submitted these rates to the Ways and Means Committee for their approval and submission to the Board of Aldermen for their approval. So what you have before you is a breakdown of the rates based on residential, commercial, and personal property taxes. So total assessed valuation, and we do have the post-Board of Equalization numbers, so this number is final. It will not be changing after tonight. Total assessed valuation for 2018, 301, 656, 107. This is an increase over 2017. And then the residential tax rates, and I will be reading this when we get to the new business first reading. General fund, obviously, for residential tax rate is 0. Commercial tax rate, personal tax rate, and the estimated revenue is increasing over last year by just, a little amount, about $4,400 for general fund. For the library, it's increasing by $89.75. Unfortunately, for the pension board, that is decreasing by $11,000. But overall, total amounts that each one of these sources will generate is provided on that list. So that's my presentation.
Okay, thanks very much. Before we get to any questions that the board may have, and by the way, this is going to come up later on the agenda, we might have a broader discussion then if need be. Is there any member of the audience that would like to come forward and give us your name and address? This is the public hearing for the taxation rates for 2018 going forward to 2019. Any questions? Now would be the time to come forward. Please don't rush the podium. We do appreciate you being here once again. And entertain any questions from the board members. If you have any now, would be a good time. Otherwise, we'll move forward. Close the public hearing at 7:12. And moving forward with the agenda, we have an opportunity for citizen comments. Once again, the floor is yours, members of our Brentwood Society, and anyone who's here at the meeting that would like to contribute to us, questions, comments, compliments, now's the time to come forward. 3 minutes is the time frame. We just need your name and address. And we're going to pass along on that. We have the mayor and alderman reports coming up next on the agenda. I'll wait here for a moment. Alderman Dimmitt.
No report.
Okay. I guess the only report that I have is really a general comment and a thanks for our staff. I know a lot of the residents and even some of the board members as well have already shared their thanks to our staff and all the volunteers that helped make Brentwood Days a fantastic success once again. There was a blessing of the weather on both Friday and Saturday. And some, I know, were complaining that it was too hot. But yes, in fact, we did not have any rain because it was too hot. There were a couple of the comments that did come up on the constructive criticism side had to do with the Board of Aldermen possibly entertaining the subject of the ride queue lines for residents and non-residents alike. We did get some comments regarding whether or not there should be fees for the rides, whether or not there should be some sort of a ability for the residents to not have to pay for the rides, or is it going to be kept the same year over year? I'm just passing along from my point of view. I did hear some criticism about the fact that we did have residents not able to get to the rides perhaps as quickly as they hoped to. So that's it for my report. Alderman Leahy.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Ward 3 meeting for the month of September will be Tuesday night, the 25th at 7 o'clock here in the council chamber, and all are invited for that. And Blues Brothers did wonderful.
Yes, they did. Alderman Lockmiller.
Regarding Public Works meeting, last meeting we had discussion. They're getting close to finishing the project clear down at Brentwood Park. So we entertained bids on replacing the maintenance building and the new playground down there, as well as some easements needed. We talked about sewer lateral, which we'll be discussing later on in this meeting. Our next meeting is Wednesday, October 10th at 4:30, right here. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Plufka.
Public safety meets the last Wednesday,
I did.
which is, I believe, the 20. Oh, did you? Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy.
That's all right, I can go. All right, just a quick reminder that the Ward 4 meeting is next Tuesday at 6 o'clock at the Brentwood Forest Clubhouse upstairs. Anyone who would like to come is invited.
My apologies. Back to you,
okay.
sir.
Give me time to find out exactly that we meet on September 26th at 5:30 in this room. We will continue to discuss traffic calming. A number of places were identified for Dan's benefit in Public Works, and he'll have updated reports on those.
And streetlights.
And streets. Right, that's right.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir.
Yep.
Alderwoman Sims.
No report.
And Alderman Wegge is enjoying a birthday celebration well-deserved for his son right now. On to the next item of the agenda. Madam City Administrator.
Thank you, Alderman Kramer. What I have for you this evening is the Manchester Renewal Update dated September 17, 2018. These expenses are from the July warrant list, the 2018 Certificate of Participation Series. So investment cost, these are costs that can be recovered to a large extent if the project is not completed. So real property, we have made purchases of different buildings along Manchester Road and in the Breckenridge industrial area. Also, direct project costs that are necessary to provide additional information regarding cost or feasibility of the project. So this would be design, engineering studies. We have a number of consultants on this project: PGAV, Planning Design Studio, Navigate Building Solutions, and these are items we will not know unless we spend the money to find them out. So this is surveying as well. $85,895.15 was spent in the month of July, and total spent to date is $847,263.70. And then the last category is the indirect or sunk cost, and these are costs that are related to the project but do not fall into the other two categories, which are legal and other transactions. To date, $91,246 was spent, And total spent to date, $507,738.54. I sent an email out earlier today to the board so that if you would like to follow along on how we allocate each one of those invoices on the warrant list, I gave an example after talking to Craig so that you can know which one are for direct cost, indirect cost, sunk cost, and different things like that.
Thank you so much. The next item, Bowl, I know you've got some information here, but the board finds itself in a position to offer some very heartfelt thanks to members of our community that always seem to step forward and help us out, and another that was a connection to that. The Brentwood Board of Aldermen and the Brentwood Police Department would like to offer thanks to Johnny Londoff Chevrolet for their generous donation of a new vehicle for our new school resource officer program. That's already taking place. The truck will allow Officer Craig Eisenbeis to provide the best protection for our schools, providing drug awareness and resistance training to our students. Also, we want to thank the Kolker and Labovitz Law Firm who graciously donated the graphics for the vehicle. It look outstanding here on your pictures. And the connection here is through the family of O.B. Clarks. We have Joe and Joe O'Brien and Jimmy O'Brien who stepped forward and made a connection that they had with the Londoff family, and everything fell together in place for the benefit of our students and the city of Brentwood. We really thank them a lot. Pictures are outstanding, and that's also a nice reminder every single day that that vehicle is going to be parked out in front of the schools for all to see that we have the program, and for the students to be reminded that we also have the program. Bola, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you, Alderman Kramer. I just wanted, the reason why I also put this on the agenda is so that the board knows that I have signed the agreement for this donation, and the city's policy authorizes the city administrator to approve sponsorship agreements of the value of $25,000 or less. So I just wanted you all to know, housekeeping, I did sign it, and the vehicle was in the parade on Saturday, and we do have pictures that we will, Shelley will ultimately put on the screen before the end of the meeting, so that those at home watching this meeting can also see it as well.
Excellent. And so every couple of years, we have by ordinance an arrangement set up with our topic of compensation study. And this year is no different. We're now to the point where, from Higbee Associates, a project that we started not too terribly long ago, overseeing, studying, and making recommendations for the compensation of all the employees in the city of Brentwood. And we're now up to the topic of our presentation for this new update from president of that organization, Ms. Linda Higbee. Please come forward. Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
I'm going to try to use a walk-around mic. If somebody can't hear me, let me know. Wave a hand, do something. Just further up. Okay, got it. I always feel like I'm shouting, so these things are always a little uncomfortable. I'm going to try to be two-fisted today. And I'm going to start out by saying a lot of your faces are very familiar, which means that I got to know some of you a couple of years ago. And what we're going to do tonight, for those of you who weren't here 2 years ago, we're going to do a quick review. I promise I really won't spend forever going through 30-plus slides for you, because we're going to kind of slide through what was decided a couple of years ago and then give you what occurred in the update this year. I'm pretty good at taking things as they come, so if there's some point here where you just want to jump in and ask a question, feel free. And we'll do that. The original study that we did for you had some very specific things you were trying to accomplish. We looked at job descriptions. We wanted to make sure we knew what people were doing. We interviewed your employees, got a real sense of what they do and what the requirements were for those jobs. We looked at all the comparators, and we're going to take a look a minute at what those are, and we got data from them. We matched jobs based on content, skill, and scope so that we knew we had good matches. And USET, as an organization, ranges at the 75th percentile for that comparator group. So that's kind of what we did. Here are the study cities. I don't think there's any reason to go through these. There was a lot of debate over who should be in it, who shouldn't be. These are your final, these are the final winners, if you will, of your comparator cities. You, as a group, as an organization, determined that you would compete at the 75th percentile. So when we looked at the data, that's where we collected it. When you hear our review tonight, that's the data you're going to be looking at, is at that 75th percentile. Again, you spent a lot of time as a council going through and saying, this is my philosophy point, and even to the point of going through and saying, and this is what we mean by that. So again, a lot of work went into that. At the time we finished your original study, 90% of your positions we could match to your comparator group. Of those that we couldn't, 3 out of the 6 were in sanitation, and just not a lot of other cities, have that function. 25 of the classifications covered 58% of your employees, and they were already above that target point that you were looking for at that time. 14% were below market, and that, again, was about 18% of your employees. A lot of those were single incumbent jobs. That's that 14 and 18. And then 11 required no change because they were sort of right on the money already. So again, this is 2 years back. Just a visual representation of that. At that point, you had 46 classifications, distinct positions, if you will. And this is kind of how you looked, low to high. And I know you guys were given this in your packets. How do you compare then? You had 46 jobs in 2015. 15 of them, those classifications, led the market. Yes, sir.
Just real quick on the 75th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
What we have here are a number of different ranges. I think you said 46.
You had
ranges.
46 classifications, yes.
Are they the same thing as ranges, or are they different from the ranges?
Classification is a position.
Okay.
So within a range, you might have multiple positions. You do. In some of them,
Okay.
you do.
And then we have the individual steps
Correct.
for each classification or each range.
Each range,
With
yes.
the 75th percentile, are each of those steps supposed to be at the 75th percentile, or is it the entry step that's supposed to be at the 75th, or is it the top step that's supposed to be at the 75th percentile?
When we did your original study, we asked for a couple of different pieces of data. One is the minimum and the maximum, which we track each year. The other thing we asked for in your original study to help us set up those steps, if you will, was we asked people, what are you paying on average for a 5-year person, for an entry point and for a 5-year person, and then we set your steps accordingly. Yes.
Okay, so it's possible that a step 3 might not be at the 75th percentile. It might be above, it might be below.
Might be a little above or a little below, but on average, they're at the 75th.
Okay, thank you.
For each step. Okay, so for those 46, again, you had 6 that were lagging. We knew you had some work you needed to do. And again, we had those 4 positions, 3 of which were in maintenance, that we simply couldn't match. For us to match, we have to have a 70% match on content, skill, and scope in order to consider it a match. So if any of those pieces don't fall at least at the 70% level, we don't consider it a match. Okay, so here we are in 2018, and we're updating some of that same information for you. You now have 40 classifications, not 46. And a part of that is, as we went through your initial study, we had some recommendations for you, where you might have had 4 different job titles, but they were all, let's say, administrative assistants, for example. And so over the past few years, as those jobs have evolved, you have consolidated titles. And so that's where that 46 to 40 comes in. When we did your update this year, 7 of them are higher than the 75th philosophy already. 3 needed to be adjusted because you had some revised scope from when we did the initial study. 21, right on the money. So again, as we were predicting where you were going and how you needed to update, you were there. 4 lag, and we have to adjust those, and we're going to talk to you about what that means. And then 5, we simply had no comparable data from the comparators for those jobs. Okay, so here's how you looked back then. You got 106 employees, and this is kind of where you were. So again, I know you've had all this. I don't want to bore you by going over the stuff that's already in your packet, but it's a nice visual representation of what you're seeing is that you've got a number of folks who are still sort of out there ahead of that 75th percentile that you've set. And it'll take a few years. We said that initially. It'll take a few years to catch up for that. So that's kind of where that looks like. Now, here's where you are when you look at standing by employees. You're leading, you're matching, you're lagging. Some people are visual, and so we kind of like to give this to you in a lot of different ways, whichever way works for you. What this shows you is that you have some employees who are above that 75th, you have some that are right in the sweet spot, and you have still others that have some catching up to do. Okay, so when we looked at employee benefits initially, back in that original study, one of the things we looked at is, so where were you sort of high or low? In most cases, you were right on the money. You were right in that sweet spot of, you're kind of like all those other comparators in terms of the benefits you're providing and how you're providing them. You had one, which was your short-term disability, that's a little richer than the other folks out there. And other than that, you were really, again, most of your benefits were right sort of in the money. You had a couple that we said, let's keep an eye on them because they kind of look high or low, and so we wanted you to keep a look on them. Jason and I have a difference of opinion with respect to life insurance, so we're not going to spend much time on that one tonight. But in our original study, one of the things we asked you to do, and we really sort of honed in on, is you really needed a compensation philosophy. So as we were putting together this update, one of the things we did is went through and said, okay, how many of the things that we recommended have you done? Did you do your homework? And as you can see, we said you got to have a comp philosophy. You guys were good. You did that. We wanted you to discontinue those longevity increases because they just weren't out there in the marketplace anymore. You did that. We wanted you to stop giving base building increases to people who are above range maximum. You guys have done that. So you've done a really nice job of sort of pulling things back into market level. We also ask you to take the time to prioritize your money in terms of where you were going to spend it. We asked first that you look for below minimums. For those people who weren't even at the market minimum, we really wanted you to get those up first. You did that. Next step increases. As we transitioned you into those new steps, we asked that you look at where people were and move them at least to the next step so that nobody was sitting sort of halfway on a step and halfway off a step, so that you were fully on a step. We made a recommendation for non-base building merits in deference to your attorneys. You are not doing that. A lot of cities are, and so that's just a piece that you have made a conscious decision that you're not going to go there. In terms of benefits, we ask that you closely monitor that contribution for health. As you're going to see, 11, I think, out of your comparators are still using the same group that you use for benefits, but there's a wide variety of what they're charging their employees for those benefits. We also ask that you look at alternatives to the sick plan for fire. So that's kind of where we were. I'm going to pause for a second. Any questions? I know some of you weren't here those years ago, and you have questions on the past. We're going to roll into the future where you may have a few more. Okay, 11 out of 13 use your same system. It's pretty widespread. But interestingly enough, that's not like you can say everybody's got the same plan, because they offer a variety of plans. And so what you see is that the deductibles, for example, that you have, 5 of those 11 are at or above Brentwood's level, okay? So no issue. 60% do reimburse some portion of that deductible. So you put a deductible out, and then the city's reimbursing a portion of it. How they reimburse is very different from city to city, and what they choose to reimburse can be very different. The reimbursement level, 50 to 100%, but when you go back and track those that are reimbursing at 100%, generally have very low deductibles, $100, $200. So there's some of those really old plans. They're still in existence. They're there. We only found one of those 13 that charge employees nothing for their premium, for example. Reimbursement, employee and family. Contribution levels for employee only, lowest was 2%, highest was 17. Again, as I said, we had one that's not charging anybody anything for employee-only coverage. Family premiums, 16% of it, up to 50%. Again, the trends we're seeing, both municipal and non-municipal, that 50% is sort of hanging in there as sort of a tight sweet spot in terms of what's going on with family coverage. Most do not have an opt-out feature. If you choose not to take your benefit package, they don't give you anything for not doing that. You have 2 that do, and they're $600 to $1,250. The other one is $600 and $2,500. So in one case, the one that's $600, it doesn't matter whether it's family or individual. That's all you're getting. The other one actually is ratcheting it based on that. Questions on benefits this year? Yes.
Yeah, you started off on slide number 11 saying that on the healthcare we match the comparator cities.
Yeah.
What does that mean when you say we match it?
When we looked at healthcare initially in that initial study, we looked at things like, what do you ask your employees to pay as a percentage of the premium? What does your deductible look like? Those kinds of things. And so when we looked at all of those healthcare items, and if you went back to the 2015 study, there were probably 25 or 30 items in that grouping. What we found is that there were some that you were high, some you were low, but overall, we would call that an equivalent package.
Okay, so it's not that we are equal in every
Item.
factor, but subjectively we are concluding, or you're concluding that
where we are equal in a sense. When somebody may be giving it, be a little richer in something else and not so rich in another area. But as a package, you're saying that we are equal to.
That is correct. You have some where you lead and some where you're not
Okay.
at average.
All right, and on slide 14 then, just for example, the benefits update, group health highlights. You've got down that the contributions for employees range anywhere from 2.25% to 17%. Does it matter where we rank in there? Can we get that information?
It's actually a part of the report that we sent. So
Okay.
yeah, it's there. And what we see when we look at this is that you're probably a little better than that in terms of what you're doing. Can we say that, Bola?
Absolutely, because very few cities continue to pay 100% of an employee's healthcare premium, and that's what the city does. I
Okay.
think your data shows there might be there's one other city other than us that does that. So that's the example that Linda was talking about. In some we lead, in some we're in the middle, and so it's subjective, as you said.
And that information was in the
Yeah,
package that we got
They
today?
have it,
Okay.
because one of the things that we looked at, again, when we do the update.
That was in the original study from 2015.
Oh,
Yeah, now
okay,
one of
so
the
we don't have what you found in.
Well, one of the things that we did this year, when we had a series of questions to update your benefits, and those are the ones I was referring to.
Okay.
Which is how we know you've still got one city out there that's doing that. It's also how we know that that city that's at 2.25, for example, is one of those cities that's saying, okay, I need to move forward. And so they're kind of, when cities transition, unlike big business, when cities transition, they do it in sort of what I call baby steps. For example, one of the ones out west started with $5 a month was all they asked their people to pay. Over time, they're working it up to that 10 to 15% for employee-only coverage. But it's done in very small increments
Okay.
as they transition those. But yes, that data is available for you. Any other questions?
Other questions?
Okay. Retiree health was one of those things that when we did the original study, we said, wow, we should have asked a few more detailed questions than we asked initially, because we asked sort of a do you kind of question, and we came back and said, well, it's really a little more complicated than that, so let's go back out and get that information in 18 when we go out. 11 of the 13 cities actually do some form of retiree health between 55 and 65. So they allow people to stay on their plan even though they retire. So during that period of time, it's there. Now, the interesting thing is there's a wide variety of subsidies from they can stay on our plan, but they now have to pay everything. They can stay on our plan, but they have to pay this. So again, it's sort of every city is sort of has their own little unique spin on what it is they're asking people to pay when they retire. Only 3 of the 11 continue with a reimbursement of some portion of that annual deductible. So there are some backups, if you will, for that retiree health plan, so that same I will reimburse 100% of your deductible or 50% of your deductible or whatever is not being extended for most folks into the retiree group. Life insurance, again, we're going to do this one really fast because Jason and I are in disagreement on this one. 11 of 13 don't require employee contributions, no big surprise. 3 only use flat dollar. Brentwood still has flat dollar. Again, one of the real key things around here is that, as most of you know, anything over $50,000 is imputed income to the employee. So that's why people are doing flat dollar, sort of cap it at 50. The trend for several years now has been to go to 1 to 2 times base pay, because people just look at it and say as a death benefit in terms of family continuation and that kind of thing, it's just different for people at different pay levels. Okay, short-term disability, 100% employee paid if there's even an offer to have that type of plan. And frequently, those who are offering short-term disability plans, it's because they have no accruals for their sick plan. And so you can really track that very closely as well. So 7 of the 13 will allow you to purchase it for the employee's cost. There's generally a 0 to 14-day wait period for those, and the 0 to 14 is sort of what you choose when you purchase that plan, and so there's a difference in cost for employees, depending on what they want. Long-term disability, almost always 100% paid by the employer. It just is. 60 to 67%, 66.6% actually is the typical replacement rate, and it generally begins 90 to 181 days after the person is out sick, and those are almost always tied to either a short-term disability benefit when that ends and/or the accrual, maximum accrual rate within your sick plans. Questions?
Yeah, I have
Yes,
a
sir.
question. With regard to short-term disability, you had indicated on a previous slide that Brentwood tends to lead the market with regard to that particular benefit. Do you have a understanding of what we've actually spent on short-term disability?
It's really very insignificant. Jason actually ran those numbers for us,
Okay.
and so what you spent, from my
Meaning,
perspective, let me
I mean, what are
rephrase
we
that.
talking
From
about,
my
Bob?
perspective, it's insignificant.
Yeah. Insignificant to one might not be insignificant to somebody else.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't have the numbers with me. I can definitely get that to you, but in
Okay.
terms of our overall costs, the short-term disability is a relatively small portion of our employee premium. The one thing that you do need to understand, we do have a 30-day wait on ours, so we kind of, even though we have a rich benefit, we kind of lag with regards to that. Most of the other carrier, or the other cities have 0 to 14 days. We're on the 30-day before it kicks in.
Okay. Does it pick up that 30 days once it kicks in?
No,
or
it does
Okay.
not. We allow the employees, though, to have a very generous amount of sick leave accrual to help compensate that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Sure. Other questions? Okay. Retirement savings, 64% have loggers, 43% require the employee to make contributions. That was a little bit of a surprise to me. Again, we didn't ask a lot of the detailed questions on the first study, and so some of this will be new. And then 21% actually match some level of the 457. It's really, if you're going to be looking at this area in any detail at all, you really want to look closely at the cities who give a match on the 457 versus their participation in loggers and the requirement for a contribution. They're very integrated. And so don't pick one of these and sort of run down that path without looking at the others that go with it. Okay, so vacation, we've talked about this before. The fire plans are different, 144 to 360 hours. Again, most of this is dependent or contingent upon service, so that it sort of goes up based on service. We had one city that kind of had an interesting model, and so that's why it's up here. If it's new and different, I like to talk about it. And they add additional hours for every year you stay with the fire service over 30 years. That's a lot of running up steps for 30 plus years. Different transition points for each city, whether we're talking about fire or just your core employees. Every city sort of has its own unique spin on vacation or sick time. And the transitions are not always years of service, which used to be pretty standard. It was almost like you could, set your clock by it kind of thing. What we saw when we asked for this additional level of detail, you have some cities in your comparator group that do this based on their pay grades. So at a certain pay grade, they get more than they do at a different pay grade. Some do it in hourly versus exempt. One actually does it based on individual specific classifications. So you really have some unique pieces going on out there. What isn't unusual is sort of the entry point and the max point. That 80 to 200 is pretty consistent across those organizations. 92% allow employees to bank it. So there's an accrual system of some sort, which is why you see people not having those short-term disability plans. Because if I'm getting 200 hours a year, banking it so that I can get through that short-term disability is a pretty easy thing, is sort of their rationale behind it anyway. First year PTO, and this was a very specific question we were asked, 40 to 80 hours. I don't think we found anybody else who was requiring somebody to work a full year before they got any paid time off. Okay, sick. Fire plans again are different. Fire is just different. They're just unique. Maximum accruals, 480. No maximum for core employees for one employer. One of your comparators has no maximum. So if I work there a million years and I never take time off, I've got a huge bank going. A few comparators allow cash out at retirement, but not all of them do. And some of them offset the amount you get at retirement if they'll cash it out. One actually says after 10 years of service, they'll let you begin to cash out your extra hours if you want to do that. Personal days. It's interesting when you ask about personal days, different people think a personal day is different things. And so even when you define it, we got some interesting stuff back. 54% have somewhere between 1 and 5 personal days. So this is in addition to vacation or sick. So it's sort of like, oops, something's going on in my family and I need the day off. But one person who came back and said, we have 3 personal days. They're actually just using their sick time, but you can say it's a personal day, but it just dings against your sick bank. So everybody's got a little bit different spin on what it is. Personal days are not in any cash out scenario. All right, compensatory time is sort of one of those unique pieces that again, I think you may want to dig a little deeper in terms of what you guys want to do. 93% allow public safety or hourly employees to accrue compensatory time. So you're right in that sweet spot. You guys are doing the same thing. 100% of those with compensatory time cap the accrual amount, meaning it can't just run on for forever. So they're 40 to 80 hours for core employees, fire 96 to 240 depending on which system they're using. Police generally match core employees most of the time, but a few have higher caps at 72 to 120, depending on the hour structure that they use for their police officers. And one allows the department head to set the cap. So from a consistency standpoint, you need to know it's out there because you'll probably hear about it from somebody, but it's not one we would sort of recommend you follow. 60% allow cash outs at termination of compensatory time, meaning that 40% of your comparators, if I have a big bank of compensatory time and then I leave you for whatever reason, I don't get any cash for it. Questions? Flex time. 86% do not have flex time, and we were very good about defining this is what we mean by flex time. So again, not a big factor out there. I know sometimes employees kind of ask for flex time, and sometimes it means different things to different employees. But we were very specific in terms of how we asked that question to sort of capture, should you be looking at that, or is that a very common practice? Any questions on benefits? Because we're about to roll into the compensation part. Okay. Philosophy, as I said, was approved back in 2015. It was at the 75th percentile. Again, nothing unique about this. It's what you guys signed off on before, but from our perspective, it's always easy to kind of review. Make sure everybody's on the same sheet. And again, that's what you did. Here's our update process. What we did is we selected 17 benchmark positions. 14 of those were core employees. 4 were out of public safety. So we wanted to make sure in both of those situations that we had very distinct update information. We went back to those same set of comparators. We had a 100% response rate. So again, lots of information flowing back and forth. We excluded any internal equity placements, and any of those, remember those 4 we talked about earlier where we said we can't match those? We didn't try to include those again in the study. So that's kind of who was in there. Here's kind of what we got from that. The update results on the 12 steps are what I call the core, folks, the non-public safety. The minimum was adjusted for grade 11 only, meaning that what we saw was a shift for the positions in that one grade, 11. Overall maximums were within market level, again, hitting that 75th percentile. We had 4 roles that, based on the change within the organization over that period of time, required, or we're recommending, you consider a grade change for those particular roles. In a couple of cases, the scope of that job changed over that period of time. In another one, you were now ready to add the levels that we saw in the original study, but you just didn't have the information available to really have like a mechanic or maintenance worker 1, 2, 3, for example, initially. And so that's a part of what you're looking at there. Grade changes. You had one job, if it was more than a 5% variance to market, we looked at those and said, do you need a grade change? And that's what we were talking about above. And there weren't very many of those. And most of them were new or expanded roles that I just talked about. Job levels for internal equity roles. What we did with maintenance, for example, and you had a multidisciplinary inspector, when we did the initial study, we came back and said, look, there's a career path in these fields, and you probably have multiple levels. But when we looked at your organization and when the managers of those departments looked at it, they said, I don't think we can really call it yet to have those levels. This year, what we looked at is to say, are you ready for that? And so you were. Although we created that 3rd level, I think, Jason, there was no one who went into level 3 at this point, right? Okay, fire and police are on 7 steps by and large. And we used a firefighter paramedic, for example. No adjustments were needed to the minimums when we looked at that in the market. The current range maximum does not need adjustment to remain at the 75th at or above. 2 comparators do have higher maximums, and you'll want to be aware of that because there's only 2. One is Ladue, and it's a couple, maybe $100, something. It's pretty minimal between the 2. Maplewood is way out ahead of everybody else. They're at 81 and change. So again, they're really high compared to everybody else. Richmond Heights was anticipating a range change. We just finished a study for somebody else that Richmond Heights is in there. Their numbers are coming in the same that they did when we did your update. So I think they may want to do one, but it hasn't been approved. Police officer is a different story. Many of you are aware of the Prop P kind of stuff. And one of the things we've asked in a number of surveys we've done is, what did you do with your Prop P money? What really changed as a result of Prop P? And here's where you're going to see it, because this is what we saw across the board, not just within your comparator group, but virtually every client we have and the others. Significant adjustments were made to the minimums. I mean, significant. To keep you at the 75th, you've got to go from 54.6 up to 57.1 almost, just to stay at the 75th. That's for the entry point for police officer. At the same time, the maximum doesn't need to change at all. So clearly what we were hearing in those surveys early on Prop P, where you're using your money, it's for the recruitment of new officers. And we also got back a lot of, we're using that for equipment. So a lot of the Prop P money got used for equipment. But in terms of what we're seeing in the pay information, it's on that entry point. And you can kind of understand that when you talk to folks in terms of the quality and the sort of the difficulty of recruitment sometimes. Okay, the other place where we saw it really jump was in the sergeant. Now, you guys have sort of a sergeant/lieutenant, which is a grandfathered event there. But what we saw was the significant adjustment to the minimums. Now, again, minimums for sergeants don't really play well with us because generally they're coming out of a police officer role. They've got to have at least 5 years here, that kind of thing. But what did happen to the range maximum is it jumped from 86.6 roughly to 92.3. So again, a really big jump on those sergeants. A couple of your comparators made jumps, but they were already so much lower than you are that even the jumps they made still don't get them into the playing field that you're in for the 75th. Only 5 steps were needed. I originally dropped the top 2, talked to Jason. I think initially what you're really looking at now drops the first 2 because we're acknowledging that nobody comes in at those levels anyway. So that's kind of where they are. Again, heavy Prop P influence here. There's just no other way to look at it, and we specifically asked, what'd you use your Prop P money for? Okay, here's what's going on with the budgets. 46% do not give merit increases. So again, more than half the cities aren't trying to call performance on a lot of these positions in terms of giving increases. 2% on the low end, 3.58 on the top, 3.58 and the 0 to 5 on individual merit when they had them was sort of a limited group of folks who were eligible for that 5%. 71% do not use COLA. Some people call their steps COLA because it's you spread the peanut butter across the board kind of thing. And it was kind of interesting to do that. One has a 4% commissioned only change that they're expecting. Only one comparator uses both COLA and merit. So you've only got one out there that's trying to call both halves of it. Range changes, 10 out of 14, no range change. And not expecting to do them in the next year. We were talking about 1, increase the spreads. They're hoping to get it approved. It's going to go before their council. And all that means is where they used to have a 20% higher low off of the market average, they're now going to 30%. So again, just a change in spread. 3 are adjusting ranges. The 3 who are adjusting ranges, the average is 1.5%. So again, if I went back, and one of the things I did for you guys, especially on the public safety side, is I went back and said if I adjusted everything that we got by 1.5%, even though you don't have many of your comparators that are doing that, it doesn't change where you are because the ones that are adjusting their ranges are the ones that aren't anywhere near you right now in terms of where they are. Okay. The other thing that I would be remiss let's just review this, and then I would tell you that we also looked at doing some changing for you. Recommend adjusting only individual ranges for those that are in 12 steps. There's just no reason to adjust overall when you had so little movement in terms of those ranges. We are recommending no adjustments for firefighter, paramedic, firefighter, EMT kind of role. Police officer and detective, which are in the same range. Again, the current range is 54.6 to 76.4. We're suggesting that you create a market competitive range, which jumps that minimum up to 57.1 and leaves the maximum where it's at. Police sergeant currently is at 61.9 to 86.6. We're suggesting you change that to 73.7 to 92.3. Again, that keeps you at the 75th. So the other thing that we did, because there was some question about, hey, what would it look like if we looked at the 85th, the 95th, or leading the market, especially in public safety, not so much across the board. And so we did do that for you, and certainly, from our perspective, you pick it and we'll run it, kind of thing in terms of your philosophy. You just have to decide what you want to do and then how you justify whatever it is you want to do to the citizens of Brentwood. So I'm open for questions. Yes, sir.
Linda, you had some examples, starting with slides, I think it was around 28 and on. So you pulled out the firefighter, paramedic, and you reported that there was no adjustment needed for the minimum. Now, some document I had some information on firefighter EMT. Now, do you have that information?
We do have firefighter EMT. Not many folks are hiring firefighter EMTs. And so when we look at that, because the minimums could shift, but nobody's hiring them anymore. So we don't really use those as an illustration because they just aren't hiring them. To adjust firefighter EMTs for you, I think when I looked at it, you have to get up to the 95th, Jason, before it really impacts a firefighter EMT.
Well, what I have is the Brentwood currently, it's 53.5 for the low and 74.8 for the high. But the 75th, it would be 56.8. So that's
But you
three for firefighter EMT. That's $3,300.
Yes, sir, but you aren't
Increase the
hiring firefighter
minimum.
EMTs anymore.
Okay, well, I
So
thought
the
you
entry
said
point isn't there.
there wouldn't be any change in the firefighter EMT, regardless whether we hire them or not. I thought you said there would be no change.
We did not adjust your entry point because you're no longer hiring them. So
Okay.
again, much like the sergeant, because you don't hire into the sergeant role, they are promoted internally.
Okay.
We didn't do those.
And the cost on the bill that's in front of us, there is a cost of $12,000, I think. Is that
Correct.
to, what does that figure represent?
There are two things. First of all, you have your annual raises that you're
Right.
getting all those steps. That is not a part of that.
Right,
The
that's
12,000,
140 or
yeah.
thereabouts.
The $12,000 reflects those 3 or 4 positions where we're saying, well, you need to change grades for these folks because they're out of scope. And it includes the changes to your officers for changing that range up to 56 for police officer.
So is it fair to say to spend that $12,000, that would bring the city back up to the 75th percentile?
Yes.
All right. And then I received an email from our city administrator today, and first of all, I appreciate you providing with that information for us to be able to take that, to take a look and see what the cost would be. But I just want to make sure I understand this. So on the 85th percentile for just public safety, to bring them up to the 85th percentile, you have down a figure of $30,920.89.
Yep.
Is that in addition to the 12,000 that is needed?
That is-
Jason is saying yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'd have to spend the 12,000 to get us up to the 75th, and then an additional 30,000 to get us to the 85th percentile.
That's correct.
And to get to 95th percentile, we'd have to pay the 12,000 plus an additional $42,877
Yes.
to get us up to, okay. So if I'm hearing that correctly, the 42,000, to spend $42,877.67, we would be able to move from the 75th to the 95th percentile for our public safety.
Jason, is that tracking with the numbers you ran? Because the reason I'm asking is you've got your annual increases, the move to move, and then what we track is when we ran 2 scenarios of numbers for you. One is I'm on step 4, I go to step 4. Those numbers were a lot higher. Then we ran where do I fall in this new set of ranges at the 85th or the 95th?
Right.
And that's the number you're looking at. So if I'm a police officer or firefighter currently on step 4, I don't automatically go to step 4 in the new range. I might go to step 2 or 3 because they've now been pushed forward.
The other thing that you need to understand is that $42,000 simply represents the cost and the increase in the salaries. In addition to that, you're going to see an increase in your workers' compensation premium. You're going to see an increase to the premium to short and long-term disability. So there are costs associated with that, as well as then a requisite cost to pension as well, because individuals making more when they retire, ultimately, then they're drawing
Okay,
greater
that
numbers.
makes sense. And then in the subsequent year, we'd have to look at that 140,000 that we're looking at in this bill would change, because it would be taking into consideration the 95th percentile.
Correct.
I mean, it's impossible to tell now what that would be, but it would be more than 140. How much more, it's hard to tell.
It's hard to tell at this point, yes.
Well, but it would be fair to say that the bulk of moving our public safety from 75th to the 95th would be the $42,000, the bulk of the cost.
Well, the 62, you said the 62 is the 85th percentile. To go, I'm sorry, you're right. I was looking at the lead.
Okay.
Yes. you're
Okay,
correct.
all right. And then in addition to, and that's a one-time adjustment, right?
Correct.
So,
But then that compounds as every year goes by because
sure,
as
but what
you've got a
I'm
new
saying
base.
is that in 2020, 2021, and so on, we would not have to keep looking at spending $42,000 to get us to a certain level.
Correct, but again, that's going to be added to your bottom line going
Right,
forward.
right.
Could I?
I'm just looking at, yeah, go ahead.
Could I just interject that as you do your updates, I appreciate the fact that you think it wouldn't change in that next year, but we don't know that until we go out 2 years from now.
Sure.
We don't know that
Right.
140, to maintain a position of the 95th, for example, might be significantly more than that.
Right. No,
So,
I
okay.
appreciate it. I'm just looking at
Okay.
status quo. You know, all things remaining equal, we spend that 42.8, we're then up to the 95th percentile for our police and firemen. In addition to the benefits that we're talking about, benefits and salary. Salary would cost $43,000.
Thank you.
To get us to the 95th percentile.
Correct.
And then we'd have some costs, additional costs in the form of benefits.
Correct.
But that would not be $42,000.
No, not at all.
Okay, you know, all I'm getting to is, we do that one time, then we're up to the 95th percentile.
Correct.
Okay.
Could I add, if you're going to change your philosophy, one of the things that we talked about initially when we did that initial study is, do you want a different philosophy for your public safety workers? And sort of what would that sort of present to the rest of the city workers? And so one of the things that I think was discussed a lot at that particular point in time is, do you want that bifurcated philosophy?
Well, wait a minute, though.
No, hang on.
And
Just-
if you do, then just make sure that you've got good rationale behind it.
And I appreciate that, and I would like to think that anything that I propose, there's decent rationale behind it, if not good. But, you know, I mean, we're treating them differently to begin with. They're on a
Exactly.
7-step plan instead of a 12-step plan. Secondly, they've got Prop P money coming in that the non-uniform do not have coming in. So
Exactly.
I think those two things alone, it justifies us treating our public safety different than the non-public safety. But that's not a question for you. As you said, that's a decision that we are to make, but that's just to address your comment about that we need to have some good rationale behind it.
The beauty of a good consultant, you tell me what your philosophy is, I'll tell you what your numbers are. Right?
That's all I have.
Alderman Plufka.
But you don't see a difference in philosophy reflected in a 7-step plan as opposed to a 12-step plan?
From my perspective, no, because when we look at the market and we look at how many steps are in each plan,
Yeah.
you can easily see why a 7-step plan is sort of the norm in public safety, so that's already there. And there are so few core people who are on steps that the 12 steps kind of aligns with those who are on steps.
But, well.
So
okay.
do I think you could? Absolutely. I have clients that I argue frequently because of the accolades that their teams get, that perhaps they should have. It's just a little unusual.
I'm working in Public Works. I'm driving a sanitation truck for the city of Brentwood. And I know, because I've been hired by the city of Brentwood, I know what the step plan is. And I know that I won't reach my maximum salary for 12 years. And I know my friend, who happens to be a police officer in the city of Brentwood, will reach his maximum salary in 7 years. And that doesn't strike you as some philosophical difference between one class of employee as opposed to another?
No, because what you've already told your employees is that we're going to have a market-based compensation system, and the market dictates that it's 7 for one and 12 for the
Then why
other.
wouldn't the extension of that logic apply to what Mr. Dimmitt just said?
I think for me...
With regard to percentages? Why wouldn't the same logic
what-
you just espoused apply to that?
You certainly could, but again, what we're showing you is that Prop P money was used for 2 positions. That's it. So your stronger argument for that, again, just playing the devil's advocate and doing your logic for you here, would be to say, for my sergeants and my police officers only, I am going to hit this level. And then I've got to maintain some level of equity between the uppers and lowers kind of thing. But I think it's purely a matter of philosophy. And if from a philosophical standpoint, you feel like, because, and again, I think I did a little bit of a here's how I might craft that philosophy statement if you decide to go that direction for BOLA. And I think if you can look at that and say, here, these individuals are sort of the public face of Brentwood, I think that's a much stronger argument than, hey, we've got Prop P money, when what we know is Prop P money was used for 2 positions and for some extra equipment.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Kramer, I apologize.
okay.
I did have a question that was not just an add-on to what
okay.
was already being discussed. And my question might be actually for you. What did we budget for this year for raises and changes in benefits based on following the compensation plan? And
Sure, that would be the 140 that was
Okay.
initially discussed. That's more or less where we're looking at. If we continue our current strategy, the 140 is there. The 12.5 was to implement
You mean
the
next
additional
year
change.
is
For-
what
for-
he's talking about.
Yeah, and actually, I was going to take it back a year because my real question had to be, was depending on what we budgeted, did we spend to that budget last year? Was that our experience? I just can't remember.
We
I thought
do. We do a calculation that we can determine how much it would cost to do, the performance evaluation. If everybody is performing, meeting expectation, this is how much we will spend. That's how we get to that number.
But
And
I
that's-
seem to remember last year at budget time, and maybe I'm not articulating it the way I should be, but didn't we have a number that we thought was going to be a target based on,
Right, so for
steps
example,
and who's
let's say
who's
we,
maxed out?
we budget 150,000.
Right.
But not every single employee is going to be meeting expectation. So
Right.
maybe 1 or 2% out of the total employee populace will not receive a merit increase.
So what I was wondering was whether or not we track that difference between what's budgeted.
We do. We send a memo to the board. I don't have it with me here today.
Do you
but
have any idea what that experience was last
It's
year?
very minimal difference between what
So
we
we're hitting
budgeted.
90%?
90+% of our population, employee population, we do meet expectation and receive their merit increase.
Okay,
I'd say less
that
than
was really my question.
$2,000-$3,000.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Any other
Thank you.
questions for me?
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Questions?
Alderman,
Linda, thank you.
sorry. Mayor.
Linda, I just wanted to thank you for all the work that we know goes into your presentation, your study, and your report. We know you are paid for your services, but we also want to let you know we appreciate all the work that goes into what you do. Regardless of the decisions that we make here as a board, the clarity that you allow us to use is very helpful. And we understand that clarity may provide us with a decision-making process different from year to year or every 2 years, and that could be the case. I did have a question for you as well as our city administrator to make sure we're on the same page. This is something I was curious about a while back, and I don't know if we ever followed up on it in detail, and that is the criteria for the performance evaluations, the formula, the template, the protocol, as it were. Are you on the same page with that?
I've not been retained to do any work with
you
respect to
seen
performance
our-
evaluation with the city. When
Okay.
we did our initial study,
Okay.
we gave you some commentary that would allow you to enhance what you're currently doing.
Right.
Would that be a fair statement,
That is
Lola?
a fair
Okay.
statement. We have incorporated that into every employee's performance evaluation document. What we had before were not a robust instrument, and we weren't necessarily getting comments from the supervisors. So now we benchmark it to performance indicators. For instance, are you responding to, for the firefighters, calls within 3.2 minutes? Or are you able to return calls for requests for action within 72 hours? Different things like that. And those are the objectives and performance measurements that the departments track on a monthly basis, and we provide that to you in the city administrator weekly report. So I would say they are not easy. Therefore, you have to be meeting expectation and performing very well to qualify for performance increases every year.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I'm curious about this is because when you're using the term comparator, I'm curious as to, are all the cities using the same criteria for these steps?
No. Some cities, it truly is, we call it the peanut butter method. There's no evaluation. It's sort of like if you are here, it's sort of a pass-fail. And so you get your increase. Other cities have not only the same comparator type system that you use where you have the metrics by job and then they're measured against that. Others have taken a little bit of a different approach, which is here's your job description and they measure you against every single one of those. And so, again, each city has sort of developed its own, but yes, you do have some cities out there in your comparator group that still are sort of saying, you know what, it's really hard to call performance. If I'm a dispatcher, I am supposed to be dispatching within this and answering a call within this, or, you know, that kind of thing. So you have some that are just saying, you know what, it's a lot of hard work, and then, oh, by the way, I've got to have the internal talent to track it and measure it. So based on their own internal makeup, some of your comparators do not do that. Many of them do, and some of them have a system that's as robust as yours. They've just been at it a little bit longer, so it's probably a little bit easier for them to get that data together and feed it back to employees on an individual basis.
Okay,
I
thank you very
just
much.
wanted to also
Yeah.
interject that we do have Prop P money, and this is the first year that we fully budgeted $443,000. A majority of that was spent on additional streetlights that we're going to be installing citywide and equipment for police and fire. Since the beginning of this year, the Board of Aldermen have approved 2 additional positions in the police department, major of community engagement, involvement, community affairs. Okay, and a senior law enforcement analyst. So when you add those two expenses to next year's budget, the balance that we will have to spend on equipments and things like that is about $9,000.
It's how much?
$9,000.
Alderman Plufka.
Well, I thought that at public safety, we decided that the DARE money was going to fund the 2 officers. I thought we were
The
going to.
DARE money.
You mean the forfeiture?
The forfeiture money.
I don't remember that. I can go and check.
Okay.
I don't.
We can't use it. There are requirements. Do you want to speak to that?
There are restrictions on the asset forfeiture.
Asset forfeiture.
Okay.
And I'll verify, but I'm pretty sure you can use it yourself.
Okay.
And I think what Paul was talking about, if I may, is that the Prop P money was for this year's
Right.
balance salary.
Yes.
Moving forward, that decision had, my knowledge, wasn't.
Well,
addition,
yeah,
right.
that's what I was going to propose. Now, if the board wants to direct me different, I'm open to that too.
Mr.
Alderman
Chairman.
Dimmitt?
Yeah, thank you. Just by way of clarification, I think the chief answered the question. I misunderstood you, Bull. I thought you were saying we had 9,000 after the money for next year. You're talking about for this year, after we spend for the...
For this year.
The streetlights, right?
Yes.
The 200,000, the 35 streetlights.
For this year.
Right, which we're not going to do next year.
That's
I imagine
correct.
no one's going to come to
It's
us
a
and say, hey, we want to spend
One time,
$200,000
but the
Prop P money.
ongoing utility cost will have to be,
Right.
and it shouldn't be that much, so.
Yeah.
But, so what I'm hearing from you, the 460 less the cost
443.
for the 200 and, well, I thought we were budgeting 460.
No, it's
For
443.
Prop P in 2019?
No,
Aren't we budgeting 466,000 in Prop P money in 2019?
460?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 460. In any event, 430, 460. I just want to make sure I get this straight. So we got the 2.5 new positions that we authorized, which is approximately $200,000. The utility cost for those streetlights, and the balance is, really hasn't been spoken for yet.
Yeah.
We haven't, okay,
That's correct.
thank you.
Other questions? So, Madam City Administrator, we've got the actual bill coming up later in the
For
agenda.
first reading.
Will, Ms. Higbee, will you remain in case we have any questions for that for a moment? Thank you for being around, and thanks for all of you who are here for portions of the agenda. We appreciate your patience, and we're going to get through it again as quickly as possible. We are on the next item up to our agenda, and I believe this is Attorney Walsh and Samuels. Madam City Administrator, we have a report, the IP Attorney Report for a matter that was deferred from some previous meetings. Yes, sir. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. Good to see all of you again. As you may recall, my name is Joe Walsh. I'm a partner with the intellectual property law firm of Harness, Dickey & Pierce. And when I was here last, my law firm and I were tasked with determining whether the city possesses any ownership interest in a GPS tracking and reporting tool that's come to be referred to as the GeoCompile system. So the first order of business was to engage the assistance of one of the senior associates in my law firm who was standing next to me. His name is Joel Samuels. So I went back to the office, talked to Joel, explained to him what the project entailed, and we began by, the first order of business was just to understand what this GeoCompile system is all about. And then we needed to ask for some documents to review, and we needed to identify persons who had information about how the GeoCompile system evolved and was developed. And so we have prepared a complete report. It's probably a little bit too much to give all of you right now. There are 75 elements in the appendix that go with it. That's about that thick, but we will make that available to you later. I figured in the interest of time, I'll give you kind of a Reader's Digest version of what we concluded. And before doing that, I think I'll just give you a little overview of what we looked at. The documents that we requested and analyzed were meeting agendas, minutes, notes, reports, spreadsheets, purchase orders, and most of these documents were collected by or at the direction of the city administrator. We also reviewed some documents provided by some of the people that we interviewed, and then also publicly available documents from the Missouri Secretary of State's website, the Missouri Municipal League, and online publications. And the people that we interviewed were the mayor, Mr. Christopher Thornton, the city administrator, Bola Akande, Shelley Todd, Police Chief Joe Spees, Major Jim McIntyre, Fire Chief Terry Curtin, Assistant Chief Contrell, Dan Gummersheimer, Kyle Allen, and Kevin O'Keefe, the city attorney. So that gives you kind of an overview of the documents that we had at our disposal and evaluated, and the people who provided information. We interviewed each of these people. We made a transcript of the interviews. And basically what we were looking for was, what is this GeoCompile system and how did it come about? And I can tell you that from what we learned, the GeoCompile system was developed during the period starting sometime in May or June of 2016 and continuing into 2017. In its initial iteration, the system utilized the following three elements: a GPS software server owned and managed by U.S. Fleet, which licensed the city to use its GPS software server, hard data accumulated by GPS devices that were obtained from U.S. Fleet and installed in city vehicles, which transmitted coordinate data to U.S. Fleet's GPS software server. That data was downloadable by way of an Excel spreadsheet, and then there was some software code that was created or drafted, written by the mayor, Chris Thornton, that organized and time-ordered the data that was taken from that Excel spreadsheet, which was then used to push this information into additional software that is publicly available. I've actually learned quite a little bit about this stuff. It's kind of intriguing that there's publicly available GPS visualizer software, it's called, where like you can get in a hang glider, hook a GPS system up to you, and go home and create a map that shows where you went, and that's free. So, and there's a lot of different forms of software that do that. But the key thing is there that the mayor created this code that kind of time ordered everything so that when you fed this into this GPS visualizer software, it actually gave you kind of a logical progression of where things went. But it still had limitations. So then somewhere in late 2017, sometime late during the period of development, some additional software was developed by a third party retained by Mr. Thornton. And during the interview, he didn't tell us who that was, but it probably isn't that important. But the software that was developed by this company that was retained by him, and from what we can tell, there's no evidence that the city collaborated with this third party, paid the third party any money, or provided the third party with any other form of compensation. But this additional piece of software together with the XML software that was created by Mr. Thornton himself, are the two parts of this whole, tracking and reporting tool that give it some interesting value. And from what we can tell, there was no involvement on the part of the city or city employees in creating these two things. So that's really important as a starting point for our analysis. When I was here last, I explained that based on the limited information that I had, it appeared that there were two bodies of intellectual property law that would basically govern ownership of whatever it was created here. I thought it was just software back then, but it's more than that. It's data and then feeding it into a software program. And my original projection remains true. The two bodies of substantive intellectual property law are U.S. patent law and U.S. copyright law. For an invention under prevailing theories of U.S. patent law, inventions are owned by their creators, unless there's a pre-existing obligation or written agreement to the contrary that suggests that that you are under some obligation to assign that. And the way you determine who an inventor is it has to do with conception. It's all about who comes up with the cool idea. It's not who kind of refines the invention or actually runs the experiment to see if it works. It's who comes up with that really cool idea. Our findings show that that was Mr. Thornton and this third-party software developer that he retained. So from a patent point of view, it would seem that Mr. Thornton would be the inventor and owner of any patent rights that might exist in this GeoCompile system. We also looked at copyright law, and copyright law is very similar to patent law. The terminology is a little bit different. Instead of an inventor, you have an author, because copyright law protects original works of authorship, and software is considered an original work of authorship. So again, absent a pre-existing obligation, if you're an employee of a company or employee of anybody, and you create an original work of authorship in the normal course and scope of your employment, by operation of law and by this doctrine that's referred to as the work for hire doctrine, and a lot of people get this wrong, even a lot of lawyers get the work for hire doctrine wrong. It's really two things. It's an employer-employee relationship where the work is created in the normal course and scope of employment, or it's in a situation where you have a specially commissioned work for some really esoteric types of works, like a compendium to an atlas, answers to test questions, something along those lines. So those are the only two types of work for hire. In this situation, the mayor was not an employee, so we can't find any pre-existing obligation there. And also, as I mentioned, we didn't find any written contractual obligation to assign any copyrights. So, in the end, that's what we determined. We weren't asked to look at the patentability of the so-called invention, if it is an invention, but we did learn anecdotally through our interview with Mr. Thornton that he had a separate patent law firm look at that question, and they determined that the subject matter was not patentable. There was a question, I think, earlier on, as to whether, because he used data, that was basically owned or controlled by the city, whether that gave rise to any ownership rights. And the answer is no. It doesn't give rise to any ownership rights. He had permission to do that. He was, operating on his own time, and he was using his own technology. But if this potential invention were to become patented, there may be a claim by the city that, it has what we call a shop right to actually to use this system free from infringement. So if he were to go out and get a patent on this, there might be a claim, and I would want to look at that a little bit more closely, because it would really depend on what the patent, the ultimate patent that issues claims. But there might be a potential claim there for what we call a shop right, which is a non-transferable right to use free from infringement. It's not an ownership right, it's just a right, it's kind of a defense against infringement. So, in a nutshell, those are our findings.
Thank you so much for your report. I know there probably are some questions. Alderman Plupka.
Thank you. So you said that the extent to which they access the data from from the data that was used was the city of Brentwood's data. And if I had this idea, and I'm not the mayor, and I'm not connected with Brentwood in any way, and I just walk up to the city hall here and I say, I'd really like access to your GPS data and to the other information that will allow me to develop this great idea that I have for real-time visualization of, vehicles that are involved in that process. And the city says, well, we have a policy, we're not going to give that information out. For safety reasons, for whatever reason, we're not going to make that available. But he was able to get it by virtue of his relationship to the city. That doesn't inure any right to the city on the resulting product that comes out of it?
Well, from an intellectual property point of view, patents and copyrights, no, because really the data is incidental. It's not the data itself that gives rise to any sort of protectable right. It's what's done with the data. So, and I think the question that you're asking is more directed not to whether, by virtue of having access to the data, there's an ownership interest, which is what we were tasked to look at,
Sure.
but rather, whether he had permission or the authority to access that data, and that we did not look at. But it appears that he did. He worked with a lot of people
Sure.
in the administration.
Open and right. And so does the notion I'm talking about get more to the possibility of that shop right that you mentioned, or is that not?
Yeah, no, that does play into it, yeah. The fact that, but the ShopRite doctrine usually is when you use, the employer's time or materials, to create your invention. And here, my understanding is the server that this ran through was owned and controlled by Mr. Thornton, also the domain name that gave portal access to that server.
Right.
So it really seems that there was really, no time or materials that the city had. I'm just saying that this is a possible thing that we might want to look at if a patent ever were to issue.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Alderman Dimmitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walsh, you did a lot of work in putting together your report. You just told us about that. You interviewed a number of people, reviewed a lot of documents. Do you feel like you received everything that you have requested?
I believe so, and I think I should ask Mr. Samuels to confirm that. He did most of the inquiries and received the responses.
Come on down. Same question. You feel like you got everything that you requested?
Yes, sir.
And the city worked with you willingly, and you had no problem getting anything from them, right?
That's correct. Everyone worked with
And
us.
so the opinion that's been rendered here, there are no caveats, it's not conditioned or contingent on anything at all?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Walsh, there was I apologize, either I misheard it or I wasn't familiar with one of the names you read there at one of the last interviewees. Kyle Allen.
Kyle Allen, Brentwood Department of
He-
Public Works.
Yes, he works in the Public Works Project Manager.
Okay, sorry, apologize. I do recognize that now, but I didn't recognize it then. Any other questions? So at this juncture, Madam City Administrator, would you consider this matter completed? We don't have any need for any executive session regarding this matter, or?
I
Should
think that's a better question for the board.
Then I will poll the board. From this point of view, is there anyone on the board that would like to further pursue this matter or poll the city administrator or the attorneys that we've engaged for further work in this regard?
Could I ask a question
Alderman
about that?
Plufka.
So what timeline are we going to have access to the actual written report, do you think?
No,
Do
we
we
can
have
give.
it now, or?
Yeah, we can give it to you now.
Before we answer a question like that, I might want to read it.
Okay. Is there anything in
I
the
would-
report that would be sensitive?
No,
Okay.
no. And, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure.
You're not going to have a lot of time to go through the report in detail.
Okay.
If you want to look at it at your leisure and then give me a call, I'm happy to answer
right.
any questions.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for all of your work on this process.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Both of
Yeah,
you gentlemen.
thank you.
Thank you for being here and for your patience tonight. Moving along on the agenda, I'll switch to the other set of glasses here. Apologize. Age is catching up to me. For those who may not be familiar, if you've attended the last few meetings, we have kind of this is probably a bad analogy, but it's kind of a bulk legislation process we're calling the consent agenda. So there are some things in a group of items that are perhaps items that would be not in need of a lot of discussion, conversation, or debate. I'll go through them here real quick, then I'll poll the board members to see if anybody has any questions or if we need to take an item off the consent agenda. First, we have the minutes approval from August 20th, 2018. We have any standing committee reports. I didn't see any that were actually included in there. Special use permit application for the food truck night for our St. Mary Magdalene School here in Brentwood. Special use permit application for the parent-teacher organization Mark Twain Elementary School event. And our warrant list, the operating funds and 2018 series certificates of participation proceeds. That last item is a little complex. So does anyone on the board have any questions regarding Alderman Lockmiller?
I'd be able to, I guess, ask a question of our finance director regarding the warrant list.
Sure. Let's do that.
Hey, Karen. Yeah, that's sewer lateral. Can I ask you a couple questions? My favorite subject. I'm just looking at, under account balance, at the end of August, we're looking at 10,008 in that balance, and yet there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 charges that we're gonna vote on tonight.
Just pointed that out to Dan today.
Is any of that reflected in that 10.8, or are we going to go that red?
That's gonna go in the red.
Okay. And so that's, we've got that coming up later on in the agenda to tackle. Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Leahy.
May I follow up? So if we approve the warrant list and we say, let's pay these bills, we're telling you to pay a bill that you have no money in the account to pay.
The budget, the line will go in the negative,
Negative.
yes.
So how do you pay from a negative balance?
Well, there's a fund balance left, and then there's other things that you're gonna consider tonight, I believe, correct? Yes, so.
Thank
But there
you.
is over $30,000 of fund balance left from 17, I'm sorry. So, but
help
yes,
cover.
we've already noticed that there's a lot of pipe solutions on there tonight. Yep,
Yes, right.
yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Anybody else? Any questions regarding the items on the consent agenda? Do we have a motion to approve all the items, 9A, B, C, D, and E, on the consent agenda?
So moved, Your Honor.
Second?
We have a first and a second. Any questions regarding that motion? Roll call vote, please.
Alderman Demme,
Yes.
Alderman Kramer,
Yes.
Alderman Leahy,
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller,
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill,
Yes.
Alderman Plufka,
Yes.
and Alderwoman Sims.
Yes.
And so we have a completion and approval of those items on the consent agenda. We have no items on the old business docket this evening, so we move forward to the new business. First item up there is bill number 6219. Mr. City Attorney, may we have the first reading of bill number 6219?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Bill number 6219, first reading, 2018 property tax rates. An ordinance to confirm, ratify, and approve the rate of tax to be assessed and collected for each $100 of assessed valuation for the year 2018 for A, general municipal purposes, B, to provide the annual contribution to the City of Brentwood's Police and Firemen's Retirement Fund, C, to pay principal and interest as the same mature on indebtedness of the City of Brentwood evidenced by bonds, D, to pay for the maintenance of the public library, providing for the effective date of this ordinance, and providing for the repeal of all conflicting ordinances.
All right, thank you, Mr. City Attorney. So for those who may not be aware, we have to do this every year. The city is required by the state statute to annually hold the public hearing, which we had earlier this evening before adoption of the proposed property taxes and the rates therefore. Prior to that public hearing, the rates were submitted to our Ways and Means Committee. They took a look, they approved the submission to the full Board of Aldermen for their approval. There's a summary of information which gives a breakdown of the residential, commercial, personal property tax rates for the general fund, the library, pension fund. There's a Board of Equalization process involved for those of you who have not protested the valuation of your property. That is a process every year by which citizens can actively take a part in protesting their valuation. The information which you may have at your seats, and for those of you who do not have them at home, The residential tax rate, the good news is for the city of Brentwood, our residents continue to have no general fund assessment and no debt service assessment. So we have 64, also basically 64.5 cents of valuation per $100 of valuation on your home. The valuations from year over year are almost flat, pretty close to $300,000 with residential, commercial, and personal property valuations across the board. That's potentially the good news. There are some in the real estate industry, city administrator and I spoke about this earlier, who are potentially of the opinion that this plateau that we're on may not last over the next couple of years, i.e. If you have to sell your home, something you may want to consider. But that's purely conjecture, and there are some indicators out there in the economy that appear to be pointing in that direction. Madam City Administrator, the only part of this puzzle that we don't have for our consideration or review this evening, not consideration, the school board tax rates are coming in October, is that correct? We don't have those yet.
I received them today.
Or do we?
You did?
Oh, you did? Imagine that. Is there a report you can give on that, just out of curiosity?
I can send you the document.
Okay. Bola, do you happen to know anything about?
I'm hearing that. for the
Okay,
first time.
all right. And for those members of our residential body, once again, the Board of Aldermen, we have no control over the tax rates from the school board. Those assessments are guided particularly and especially by them solely, and we have no control over that. Does anybody have any questions regarding the tax rate topic? Steve Lockmiller, Alderman Lockmiller.
Question for Madam City Administrator. Under the general residential, and by no means am I going to make a motion to suggest this, but if we had a rate there, if we could charge a rate, what would that be? Isn't there something we can do without?
Well, so the city already has authorization to assess a tax rate for general residential. But many, many years ago, the city decided to roll that back and not charge anything because we were fortunate to be collecting more sales tax.
Right.
So that was the logic behind why the city does it. But what that rate would be, I don't have that number right with me. Karen, do you happen to know what that rate is for?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that you could not just automatically impose that, based on what I've learned since being in Missouri, because the cost of living CPI index gets put in there, and it's like a 14-page Excel spreadsheet that the state auditors give you, and you plug in the assessment values in that. And I think when the library chose to go to the top of theirs, it was done incrementally last year or the year before. And I think it's only, you can only do it even or odd years, something like that.
Right.
It isn't something that you can just go say, and don't quote me, but I think it's like 0.3 something.
Okay.
That's for the top of it, for the residential portion of it.
So I guess my point being, we're learning to live without close to $600,000, or, yeah, $600,000 in income, had we had a tax there.
For a long period
Roughly.
of time.
Yes,
Right. Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you.
You are correct, sir. Anybody else? Ladies and gentlemen, as per your agenda, and because of the scheduling of the requirement by St. Louis County at 5 o'clock October the 1st, we will have exceeded that timeline by our next meeting, and so therefore, the agenda calls for a second reading tonight on this agenda. So, Mr. City Attorney, may we please have the second reading by title only of Bill number 6219?
Yes, sir. Second and final reading of Bill number 6219, 2018 property tax rates. An ordinance to confirm, ratify, and approve the rate of tax to be assessed and collected for each $100 of assessed valuation for the year 2018 for A, general municipal purposes, B, to provide the annual contribution to the City of Brentwood's Police and Firemen's Retirement Fund, C, to pay principal and interest as the same mature on indebtedness of the City of Brentwood evidenced by bonds, and D, to pay for the maintenance of the public library, and providing for the effective date of this ordinance and the repeal of all conflicting ordinances.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. May we please have a motion for perfection?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to perfect Bill 6219 into ordinance form.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further questions or questions at all regarding 6219? Now's the time. Roll call vote, please.
Alderman Demmett.
Yes.
Alderman Kramer.
Yes.
Alderman Leahy.
Yes.
Alderman Lockmiller.
Yes.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
Yes.
Alderman Plufka.
Yes.
Alderwoman Sims.
Yes.
And so we had the first and second. So if this bill is signed,
Bill number 6219 passes, and upon signature of Acting President of the Board of Aldermen, becomes ordinance number 4857.
thank you, Madam Deputy City Clerk. Bill number 6220. This is the subject of a previous public hearing here this evening. And we've got, as a reminder, the next item, this one is a first reading only. Mr. City Attorney, may we please have the first reading of Bill number 6220?
Yes, sir. First reading of Bill 6220, an ordinance to update and implement employee compensation plans for the city of Brentwood, Missouri, beginning in fiscal year 2019 and related matters.
And for those that may not have paid all the attention for the previous conversation regarding the public hearing, Bill 6220, this is basically an ordinance to update and implement the employee compensation plan for all of our employees for the city of Brentwood. It starts fiscal year 2019. It also amends the 7-step non-uniformed and the 12-step compensation plan pursuant to review of the comparator cities as presented by Higbee and Associates. Does anybody have any questions regarding this bill? Alderman Leahy.
If I may, I think my question might be best answered to Mrs. Higbee. In one of the motions that we're moving around, you're establishing a multi-level, the term you're using is multi-discipline inspector, position 2. And I have 2 people that are already doing multiple discipline inspection. Why am I jumping them up into this category?
You're actually creating 2 levels. It's a career path, and one of the things we've found in the market is that generally there are 2 levels. There's sort of an entry point, and then after there's a certain level of experience or expertise, if you need it, you promote into the second level.
And our regular way that we have it, with the stepping going through the 12 years, that doesn't pick up that?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't provide the promotional opportunity of a career path or a career step. And so what we're finding is that there's 2 levels in the market, and those are what's reflected in those 2 separate sets of ranges.
So now I've taken my 2 employees and I've moved them into this new position.
You may or may not have moved both of them in. You may have left one in one level
I
and
believe
one
we
in the
moved
other.
both of them in. The recommendation
move
is to
both of them
move.
in?
You want to address that?
So now I've moved them both into the level, let's call level 2 position. And I've got my 12-step program for them. So I've given them the same, difference between 1 and 2 is what the salary is from those ranges. So I don't see how I've improved their career path. All I've done is change what I can do in their salary payments. Am I missing something here?
What we ended up doing was the planning and zoning director basically created a secondary job description. The entry-level job description was for the multidisciplinary inspector 1, and that had a basic set of requirements. In order to qualify for the multidisciplinary inspector 2, they had to have 4 separate additional certifications. Both of our individuals have those certifications, and that is why they were moving from one to the other. In the event that one of those leaves the city at some point in the future, or we add an additional position, we would go out in the market for the step, for the 1. And then in the event that that individual in turn gets the additional requirements, they would then move up to the secondary status.
So in this new position, are we treating him like we do our sergeants and lieutenants? It's not really, steps 1 and 2 don't get picked up because he had to have 4 years of experience to get to the level 2 position?
Not necessarily.
So he picks up the back half?
Not necessarily, because the individual may come on board with those additional certifications. In the event that they did, that grants us the flexibility to bring them in as a step 2 in lieu of step 1, provided that we have a budgetary need for it and there is a vacancy requiring it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Ms. Higbee, thank you once again for staying, your time, your
Yeah, thank you
presentation.
very
Much
much.
appreciated. For those of you in the audience who would like to follow along with this particular item, we are off our summer schedule starting in October. happens quickly, and so the next meeting where this bill will come up again for the final reading is on October the 1st. And that's up to our next agenda on the item. On the agenda tonight, the 11C, the budget amendment. Madam City Administrator, we have a sewer lateral program that appears to be needing of funding.
Yes, absolutely. Would you please recognize Dan Gumersheimer,
Uh,
Public Works
Director Gumersheimer, please, sir. We need a cash infusion.
Yes. I know that we discussed this in Public Works. I don't know how much the rest of you have looked into it or understand the program, the changes that have evolved as a result of changes to the program in general. The big change would be Brentwood Forest Condominium Association. You know, there's 1,425 units. Of those 1,425, 683 of them drop off the list. In other words, there's no assessment, but they also get no benefit. There was no program for them. And then 463 units drop from $50 down to $25 for the assessment because they share a common lateral. And the way the statute reads is, you know, that if they're connected, it gets split in half. We only collected 50, so the 50 divided by 2 is 25. And then there's 279 units that would be the $50 per unit. Those are typically the townhouse. So what it means in a nutshell is that we used to collect 71,250. That total annual assessment will drop to 25,525, which is a drop of almost $46,000 annually. It's 45,725 if you want the exact number. So what it does in the fund is typically our revenues were around 193,000. So it'll drop that overall number by about $46,000. So our expenditures have always been in the 170 or greater. If you look at a 5-year, I did a 5-year analysis for Public Works where I actually did a little bar graph. It's got a red and a blue bar that would indicate revenues versus expenditures. And we've been pretty equivalent for like actuals for 13. In 14 and 15, the revenues were actually ahead of expenditures, so you had a surplus. But then the reverse was true for 2016, 2017, and now 2018. So in order to continue the program, you know, we'll have to look at some other changes to discuss in Public Works. But the way the program's operating now is the cleaning and cabling, that's probably going to trend towards over $30,000 by the end of the year. We're in the low 20s right now. Last year for for 2017, the cabling and cleaning amounted to $42,000. So there's way over 200 cabling cleaning requests in 2017. This year, I believe we were up to a little over 120. Yeah, I've done the math, so yeah, it was right around 139 actually. I did the through September. So what it amounts to is you've got about 14 or 15 cleaning cablings per month. And that's actually down from last year, which was closer to 20 on average. So, you know, that's costing you money out of the overall account balance. Every time somebody calls, says they have backup, could be roots, could be grease. You know, the program is really set up for repair, not necessarily a cabling cleaning, but that's where we are.
Dan, when we, just to walk through a couple things preliminary, when we walked through this before, Brentwood Forest was still on the table, taking them off. You're taking not only the revenue off, but the amount of claims for that dollar amount was pretty small. So that revenue really is a big loss, taking that out of the program. And then the other topic that came up was the cabling. And we talked about, from a philosophical point of view, providing that as a service to our residents, understanding on a comparator basis that other municipalities don't necessarily do that. What we didn't do on that aspect that we did on the claim amount was put a limit. And I wondered if we were to put a limit on the cabling or clean out service for the residents of the city to 1 or 2 a year, is that helpful and or reducing the amount on the limit? Is that helpful? Or are you talking about each of those cleanings is just for an individual unique call and they're not repeats?
The simplest would be just to eliminate it because that would free up more money for actual repairs. That's what the comparator cities do. There's a few out there that actually charge a deposit, and that covers the time and material, like say a bill from Gateway, which typically ranges from $95 to a couple $100. You would put $150 of your own money into it, and if it went over it, you weren't obligated to pay more than the $150, but if it goes under, that just keeps feeding that program of cleaning the cabling. So there's other ways around it.
But are the cleanouts that we're currently being charged for, any of those are repeats, or is that all individuals?
No, there are repeats. That is correct. Yeah, in fact, I know that there's a few repeats in Brentwood Forest, and then there's at least 3 that are repeats that are single-family homes. You know, for some odd reason, either it's roots, a lot of it is roots. Whenever you look at it holistically, I'd say 85–90% of what caused the backup are minor roots, major roots, you know, some sort of intrusion into the clay, because it's typically the older homes, you know, 1930s, 1940s. The clay, the little, you know, grouted joints start to fail. The roots are seeking out water. There's water in sewage, so it tries to do what it does.
Okay. Alderman Dimmitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when this came out of Public Works, we made a motion, I thought, to approve. I thought the motion was to approve up to 30,000. What we have here in front of us is to approve the amount of 30. Does it matter which way we? Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion to transfer funds from the general fund unassigned in the amount of $30,000 to the sewer lateral repair program.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Anybody have any questions regarding that motion? Alderman Lockmiller.
Well, if I'm looking at the warrant list, what we just approved in expenditures, we're already $20,000 in the hole. You still got to get through the rest of the year in cabling.
Right, the cabling, I did the statistical analysis, that's like roughly $2,500 a month is what we're spending on cabling and cleaning. It's not repairs, just getting through the obstruction, or sometimes there is no obstruction, they didn't find mud or sewage, sludge, you know.
So you got, what, another 3 or 4 months of that?
Right, that's what I just kind of did like a quick analysis in Excel, and I thought, well, that's $2,500, $2,500, $2,500 for the 3 whole months, so that's $7,500 plus the remainder of September. That's why I was looking at it. Right now we're at 22. I'd probably hit closer to 31 if I were to place bets on how much cabling will be through the end of the year.
And that's if nobody else comes forward with a broken sewer line.
Right. And the broken ones have seemed to go down looking at year over year, like 2017 versus 18. The problem is that even though the quantity's gone down, the cost has gone up because those are done by outside contractors, either XL or Pipe Solutions or someone of that nature. So of course they're for profit, they're charging you their overheads, their profit margins.
Right.
You know, it winds up shooting the cost up per repair.
Did you have something to add, Karen?
Director Shaw?
I'm just gonna throw another little monkey wrench.
Oh, no.
When we did the budget that started on it this time last year, we weren't sure what was gonna happen with Brentwood Forest. So there's what, 193 or something budgeted for revenue. I'd be willing to guess that we're not gonna get that, because I think the Brentwood Forest contacted the county in the spring of this year. And if you look on someone's bill with their property taxes and they pay it by the end of September, it says they're paying for 2017. My guess is we're probably not going to get all that revenue this year. So it's going to go, it could go in the hole even more. I am positive it's going to go in the hole more than $30,000, even if we don't get that extra revenue. I think what I would recommend right now, and let me just jump back one thing too. Last year, if you remember on warrant lists, the Manchester Renewal Project line never had a positive balance because there was never anything budgeted. So we did pay in the negative because we knew we were gonna do a budget amendment towards the end of the year. I think I would recommend at this time, since it's September and we do a normal annual budget amendment in November, that we wait and see where we are in November. Particularly, we could be getting some of that property tax revenue to see what we're gonna get. Are we not getting that $50 or whatever at Brentwood Forest? And also, I did try to contact the county at least 3 times today to ask them to verify that with me today. Guess what? I couldn't get hold of anyone. I got voicemails. But I think we're going to see less than the 193, so it's going to be even more than that. So I think I would wait, and let's see what happens in November. The money's still going to be there, You're going to continue to see a warrant list where it's in the negative. It's going to give you a better idea how much more in the negative you are. And then come November, Dan and I can get together again. That's why I said we had this conversation. And I said, Dan, where'd 30,000 come from? I see on the warrant list a whole bunch more the pipe solutions. So that's just my 2 cents into it all. That's why Bo was
Thank you.
waving at me.
Alderwoman O'Neill.
This is probably for Dan, but he may talk to you about it too. I'm wondering if we were to modify the program to make it more in line with what some other cities do, so that if someone calls for a sewer lateral cleaning, it turns out there are roots, then the city pays for it. If it is something that is not roots, it's a backup or something that is user-caused, then they pay the cost of that. Do you have any idea how many of those calls there are, and how would that affect our bottom line?
That's where I was saying, like, the majority of the cabling and cleaning are root associated, but the way the majority of the comparators see it is, that's a maintenance or a housekeeping type situation where you could add root X, you could pay a plumber or drain layer to cable those roots out on a 5-year rotating basis, and the pipe's going to continue to operate. No different than like doing an oil change or cleaning your gutters. If you do those things, you'll get more life out of your car, house, whichever analogy you're looking at.
Right, but if it is not roots, you said you estimated 85% were roots, that means 15%
They just cover the
are
collapse. If
not?
they see a sinkhole and the pipe's collapsed, then you'd be eligible. But if a giant root grew in there and sealed off part of the bottom of the pipe and it backed up, as soon as you knock that root loose, the pipe flows again. So the way they see it is that was a maintenance issue.
So is there any way of determining?
You won't
anything?
determine it until you get in there and actually get into the pipe.
Right.
And it does say it in a report. That's why in Public Works, I gave like 10 sample reports where it would say minor roots, or that it was grease or some sort of obstruction. Somebody put clothing-related items or something in
Right.
there.
So is there any way you can estimate if someone who had clothing or something in there that was not roots, is there any way of estimating how much the city could recoup by charging those residents for
We
having the city
could do that
service
because
done?
we keep track of it on a month-by-month basis. So all I have to do is look at, I've got a big binder that I didn't bring with me, but it lists each and every report by month. And then you could look at that report, and if it's roots, you could just create a column that would say R for roots, and what that dollar amount is. The dollar amount's already in there. So all you'd have to do is flag that row, add that column, and then figure out what that is per month, and then, do a summation of all those pages. It's doable.
It's doable. You don't have figures off the top of your head.
No,
but
I'd just be
You could go
guessing.
in and do it.
I'd rather just go through the Excel exercise and bring that
Would it
back.
be worth doing, considering to have?
I know,
residents pay
just
part
my
of the
gut
cost?
feel is of that 22,000, like I said, I'd probably say 85-90% would be root related rather than some other issue.
Okay.
Alderman Plufka, excuse me, Timmett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Point of order, I guess. What's in front of this board, we're not looking at modifying the policy tonight, correct? Isn't the only question whether we are going to authorize staff to pull $30,000 out of the general fund? Isn't that correct?
I agree with you I agree with you with that, but I think it's allowable, some of the questions, because we're funding apparently a program that's not able to be sustained without these contributions, and so I think some of the questions are trying to get at, is it fixable or is it not fixable, and I think that's pretty much the deal.
Well, and the other question I have might go back to Karen. Sorry, Karen.
Go ahead. Director Shaw, please.
Did I understand your recommendation? It would be your suggestion to not approve this 30,000, but instead to wait until November?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because you don't have any problem, like you said, with Manchester Renewal last year, we paid it, we just take care of this with a
All at
budget
once.
amendment later
In
on.
the budget amendment in November, when we would have more information, more pipe solutions, we'd start seeing revenue coming in
Okay.
probably at the end of October and beginning of November.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I would call the question.
Did you want to withdraw? We don't want to withdraw the motion.
Call the question.
Call the question.
This is the,
I'll second that.
Okay, we're going to call the question. And so let's have a roll call vote on, the question.
Can we ask what the question is?
I guess sure,
We
now
would
we have
like
a
to
motion and a
postpone
second.
this, we need to have a no vote on the motion, is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Or we could just rescind the motion.
That's true, too.
Okay.
I have no problem.
That's what I thought we were gonna do.
In light of the recommendation from our Director of Finance, I have no problem withdrawing the motion.
Okay. Withdrawn, and the second is withdrawn. And with this,
Who did the second?
I'd make a motion to refer this back to Public Works, where we can take up what Dan's got available to us. And
Okay.
Anybody that wants to chime in is more than welcome to come to Public Works.
just to be clear, we've withdrawn the first and the second motion, so that motion is dead. We now have a motion on the floor to send this to committee, which would be Public Works, and a second for that.
Second.
And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, there we go. Thanks, Dan. All righty. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it this far, thank you. And congratulations, we're almost at 9 o'clock, and we have an opportunity for your input once again. This is citizen comments for the Board of Aldermen meeting. Now's your chance to come forward. We need your name and address. Got up to 3 minutes to speak. Going once, and going twice. We now, I believe we're going to have representation helping us out with a executive session. So we need to go into recess and re-adjourn into that executive session. Motion for that.
I make a motion that we adjourn to executive session citing Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 610.021, and that we adjourn the meeting from that executive session.
Motion.
Second.
So, ladies and
I'm sorry, before you vote, the purpose is for attorney-client communication.
Attorney-client communications. This is a legal matter. Ladies and gentlemen, we will not be coming to chambers. We'll be adjourning from the executive session, so thank you for coming. And we will now stand in recess to the conference room.